Good evening, boys and girls, and welcome back to another episode of Mr. Baker's Cake School. No, don't worry, there's nothing wrong with your computer. As today is VE Day, I thought I'd get a little bit into the spirit of things. Anyway, welcome back, mini chums, and as you can see, we are back in the Mr. Baker's Cakes kitchen, which is amazing because I've missed it so much. Don't worry, I haven't just abandoned her. Mummy Baker is doing really well, but I'll be continuing to pop over and check she's okay a few times a week. Now, as I've already mentioned, today marks the 75th anniversary of VE Day, which stands for Victory in Europe Day. And this marked the end of the fighting in Europe during the Second World War. People were so happy that the fighting had finally started to come to an end, and there were celebrations all over the country, including street parties in almost every road. I wonder if you had a street party in your road today to help you celebrate the anniversary. Of course, it's important that we remember that this is also a day for reflection, for us to think about all those people that gave their lives to help protect our country and keep us all safe. Now, one of the things that happened during the Second World War is that the enemy tried to cut off the food supplies to our country, and this meant that lots of things were in really short supply. To make sure that everyone had fair access to food, the government introduced something called rationing, and this meant that everyone was allowed a certain amount of key ingredients. Things like meat, fish, cheese, eggs, milk, sugar, and lots of other foods and key ingredients were strictly limited, and you were only allowed a certain amount each week. Now, although VE Day marked the end of fighting in Europe, rationing actually continued for another 9 years until they were able to re-establish food supplies. So although people were out in the streets celebrating VE Day 75 years ago, they had to be very creative because of course they weren't able to just whip up lots of everyday baked goods because they didn't have the ingredients. Now, to help us commemorate the anniversary of VE Day today, I thought it might be fun to have a go at a wartime recipe of our own. So in this week's video, we're going to be making Wartime Jam Tarts. Let's get to the video. Now, under rationing, an adult typically received an allowance of about 450 grams of jam every 2 months, which isn't very much at all. So something like a jam tart would have been a real luxury. Of course, in those days, people were far more willing to go out and actually forage or find fruits for themselves, or even grow them in their gardens and use that to make their own jam, using their sugar ration of 225 grams a week. Now, don't worry, I'm not going to be expecting you to make your own jam today, although if you'd like to, I've popped a link down in the description box below to a really simple jam recipe that I use quite often. But to make today's jam tarts, you are going to be making your own pastry, which is something we haven't yet done here at Mr. Baker's Cake School. I'll warn you, it's not a typical pastry, because again, we're going to try and use the ingredients that would have been available during the Second World War and rationing. So it's a very simple pastry, but I hope you'll still like it. Anyway, before we get started, it's time to go and wash our hands, pop on our aprons, and let's get baking. Now, before we get started on making our wartime jam tarts, I'm just going to start, as always, by taking you through all of the ingredients you will need. Now, I say all of the ingredients, but actually there aren't that many. So to start with, you will need 225 grams of plain flour, and that's the type of flour that doesn't have a raising agent in it. When we're making pastry, we don't want it to rise, we want it to stay nice and thin. So that's why we're using plain flour today. You are going to need 85 grams of chilled cubed butter, and we've done this a few times now, so hopefully you'll have no problems with doing that. And then the last ingredient for your pastry is actually just going to be some cold water. Now, I have a whole jug full of water here, but we're not going to need very much at all. And then to fill our jam tarts today, as I've already said, we're going to be using shop-bought jam. Although you are welcome to make your own if you want. You'll need about 150 grams of jam, and what I like to do to make it easier to work with is add 1 tablespoon of boiled water and just stir it through, because that will loosen it up a little bit and make it easier to put into your tart cases. So that's my jam. Now, just like when we were making our scones and last week's Welsh cakes, we're going to begin by combining our flour and our cubed butter into a large mixing bowl. And then exactly the same as the scones and the Welsh cakes, we're going to then combine those together using the technique where you squeeze the butter until it becomes like breadcrumbs. Now, as I say, we've done this a few times now. We did it for scones and we did it for Welsh cakes. So I'm going to rush through this bit, but if you haven't yet checked out those videos, they are linked down in the description box below. So if you'd like a little bit more advice or guidance on how to do this bit, that's where you can head. When your mixture is fully combined and it looks like this, so like almost like breadcrumbs and there's no lumps of butter left in it at all, the next thing we're going to do is add 1 tablespoon of cold water. Now the job of this water is very much just to bind these ingredients together, to turn them almost into a dough. So we don't want to use very much at all. That's why we're just starting with that 1 tablespoon. Now if you find that 1 tablespoon isn't enough water, that's absolutely fine. You can add some more, but this time we're going to do it in increments of 1 teaspoon because we don't want this dough to end up too wet. So add in that 1 teaspoon, continue trying to combine the dough together, and then just keep adding 1 teaspoon at a time until you find that you're able to form your mixture into one ball of dough. The pastry that we're making is a very simple version of a short crust pastry, so you should find that it is still very crumbly. I've ended up using just under 3 tablespoons of water to bind my dough together, and it now looks like this. Now pastry likes to stay cold, so one thing I like to do before I start rolling it out to use for my tarts is just pop it in the fridge for a few minutes just to let it chill down. Because of course my hands are warm and they will have warmed up that water and that butter, and I want them nice and cold again. So I'm just going to take a little bit of cling film, pop my pastry in the middle, and then I'm going to pop that in the fridge for about 10 minutes while I get on with the next part of our bake. While our pastry is chilling in the fridge, we're going to get our baking tray ready. Now ideally you want to be using a shallow tart tin for this bake, but I can't actually find mine. So what I'm going to do is use my regular muffin tin, which you saw me use when we made cupcakes way back in episode 1. And I'm going to show you how you can use one of these to do your jam tarts if you don't have a shallow tart tin either. Now the first thing we're going to do to stop our jam tarts from sticking to the tin is we're going to take a little bit of extra butter and a screwed up piece of greaseproof paper. Rub the greaseproof paper into the butter and then use it to spread that butter into each of the sections of your muffin tin. And then when you've done that, the other thing that can make it tricky to get your shallow jam tarts out of these deep sections is it's really hard to get a grip on the sides. So what I like to do, rather than worrying later about trying to lever them out with a knife, is I take a little bit more greaseproof paper, cut it into little strips, and then pop one in each of those sections. That means that when it's time to take my jam tarts out later, all I'll need to do is gently lift up the paper from the sides, and hopefully it will lift out the jam tarts with it. The other thing you can do now, whilst your pastry is chilling in the fridge, is preheat your oven. If you have a fan oven, you can preheat it to 180 degrees C, but if you just have a normal oven, you'll need to preheat it to 200. So I'm going to go and do that, and then I will see you in a few minutes time. So once your oven is preheating and your baking tin is lined and ready, it's time to roll out our pastry. Now, a warning, it will be crumbly, so don't worry, it's a short crust-ish pastry. So crumbly is good. Crumbly means it will be nice and crisp once it's baked, and that's what we're after. So, to roll it out, we're going to sprinkle a little bit of flour onto our worktop, and then we're going to grab a rolling pin and roll it out. Now we've talked about how to roll before. Remember, you need to keep it moving so it doesn't stick. So we're going to roll it a little bit one way, turn it, and go a little bit the other way. Now bakers during rationing had to be really quite clever and ingenious because of course there were so many ingredients that they couldn't get hold of regularly. So if this has kind of piqued your interest a little bit and you'd like to have a go at some more wartime recipes, then just jump on the internet and give them a search because there are lots of them to be found out there. One ingredient they used to use fairly regularly was carrot because it's so sweet. It provides a really good substitute for sugar. Now you want to roll your pastry to about ½ centimetre thick. Mine is cracking a little bit and yours will too, but that's fine. We just need to be careful to avoid those cracks when we're cutting out our rounds. Now to do that, you're going to need a pastry cutter, and I'm using a 7 centimetre pastry cutter today. And I'm just going to use the straight round edge, not the fluted side, to cut out some rounds of my pastry. These are then going to get put into the muffin tin. Try and line them up as neatly as you can. And then just push them down gently with the soft part of your finger to create that tart shape. And it should look something like that. If you do find that one of your pastry rounds cracks when you're putting it into the tin, don't worry too much, just patch the hole with an extra little bit of pastry, otherwise the jam could leak through. When you've cut out as many of your pastry rounds as you can, just like normally when we're working with a dough like this, we're going to squeeze them all back together and roll it out again. And then when you've done that, you should hopefully have a tin that looks a little bit like mine here. And any of these random little offcuts, you can either use to make a couple of extra ones, or you can just get rid of them. Now the last thing that we need to do before we put these into the oven is of course add our jam. Be careful not to overfill them, because what can happen is as the jam starts to bubble and boil, it can go over the edges and then it will stick them into the tin, which is not ideal. So really you're going to want about kind of a generous teaspoon like this one in each one, which isn't very much at all. But don't forget, of course, during the Second World War, jam was rationed, and so they wouldn't have wasted lots of it. It was more just about having a little hint of a treat. And so again, if I show you what I've done, we've just got a little teaspoon of jam in the centre of each of our pastry cases. And then these are going to go into our preheated oven for about 15 to 20 minutes. You'll want to keep a close eye on them because where we haven't used any sugar in our pastry, it won't brown as much as you'd normally expect. So do keep a close eye, we don't want them to burn. Anyway, I'm going to go and pop mine in the oven and I will see you when they're done. And don't forget, this is the perfect time to have a clean up and to do the washing up.
A few moments later.
And as always, through the magic of editing, there they are. Now I'm sure you'll agree they don't look like the sort of jam tarts we're used to these days. And the biggest difference between these ones and the ones that you can buy in the shops are that the pastry doesn't contain any sugar. And what that means is it doesn't caramelise in the oven, so it stays that really pale colour that it was before we baked it. But it is definitely baked, so don't worry about that. So next what we need to do is transfer these onto a cooling rack so that they can cool down completely. The pastry will cool down a lot quicker than the jam, so it can be tempting to want to try them before they're properly cool, but that jam will be very, very hot to start with, so do be very careful of that. But hopefully we should find that my grease-proof strips make them really easy to lift out of the cases like that. Now of course, as is traditional during my videos, I'm going to have to taste one to see what they're like. I hope the jam has cooled down enough that it doesn't burn me. Do you know, they're not bad. They're not quite as nice as my usual recipe for jam tarts, I'll be honest with you. But I think that just goes to show how inventive and creative people had to be during the World War and during rationing to be able to provide their family with the sorts of tasty treats that I think we take for granted sometimes. And I think that's what VE Day is all about. It's about remembering the incredible sacrifices that people made for a long time to ensure that we could enjoy the lives that we have today. Yes, we might be stuck indoors and not able to do some of the things that we like to do, but when you compare it to what life was like 75 years ago, I don't think we've got very much to complain about, have we? I hope you enjoyed finding out how to make wartime jam tarts with me, and as always, if you do have a go at making some of your own, make sure that you share them with me over on social media. I love seeing what you've been making at home. Now before we go, there is one more thing that I need to talk about, because today is the day that I announce the winner of my Kenwood K-Mix stand mixer giveaway. First of all, I have to say a massive well done to everyone who entered. There were so many of you, and all of your gingerbread men looked absolutely amazing. In fact, I'm going to put up a selection on the screen so that you can see them for yourselves. Now, as I said in my Gingerbread Men video a couple of weeks ago, it wasn't a decorating competition, so don't worry if you're thinking, oh no, theirs looks better than mine, because all of the names of everyone who entered went into a hat. Well, actually it was a computer program hat. But anyway, they went into a hat, and I'm so excited to announce that the winner of quite possibly the biggest competition I've ever run here on my channel is Valeria Alina. I absolutely love seeing the gingerbread men that Valeria had baked with her 3 children, and I'm sure you'll agree that the results were absolutely amazing. I particularly loved your giant gingerbread rainbow. It was awesome. Valeria, if you could get in touch with me via social media, I'll tell you how you can claim your prize. And again, a massive well done to everyone else who entered. I'll be doing another giveaway on my channel very soon. So if you haven't already subscribed to Mr. Baker's Cakes here on YouTube, make sure you do that by hitting the big red button before you go. All that remains is for me to wish you another happy and healthy week ahead. I hope you've had a wonderful day commemorating the anniversary of VE Day, and I'll see you at the same time next week for another episode of Mr. Baker's Cake School. Take care, guys.